Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Salem. I'm the president of the Middle East Institute, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all today, although it's a very somber topic, but very happy to have you all with us. It gives me great pleasure also that this is an event being co-organized with Southern Methodist University and the Tower Center there, coordinating with my good friend Ray Rafidi and our colleagues Sabri Atesh, Jim Holyfield, Astrid Galpin, and Jenny Apperty, who couldn't be with us today. I visited SMU and the Tower Center just a couple of months ago. One of our board members teaches at SMU, so it's a lovely relationship. Obviously, our three panels today are delving into the obvious crisis areas, crisis period that we're living through. This is the most extreme outbreak of Israeli-Palestinian, or if you want to say Israeli-Arab conflict, since 50 years, since 1973. A game changer for Israel, for the Palestinians, for the region. Obviously, a lot of loss of life, a lot of devastation, and a conflict still with no clear end in sight. It might get worse before it gets better. A conflict that has spread to the Red Sea, to Yemen, to Lebanon, to Syria, to Iraq. But we are also going through the most acute period of Israeli-Iranian risk since maybe since the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979. So we are really in very, very dangerous waters, very difficult times. It's also a period where the U.S. has been drawn back in deeply into the region, whereas three successive presidents, I would say Obama, Trump, and Biden, all wanted to try to pivot away to somewhere else. And while Europe and Asia are still very high on U.S. national security priorities, it's the case that the U.S. has been drawn back into the region in a big way, and most of their activity, military deployment, and so on, is back in the Middle East, something that affects current U.S. policy, U.S. national security policy. Obviously, it has also caused the biggest set of protests in the U.S. maybe since the Vietnam War. So the politics in the Middle East is now also creating great change in the United States as well. We are in an election year, and a lot still could be coming down the road. So no, more urgent time to convene and to discuss. I just want to welcome you all before we turn it over to the first panel, and welcome my friend Ray Rafidi from the Tower Center and from SMU to make a few welcoming remarks. As you can see, we have three panels today. One focusing on Iran and its proxy network. That will be the first panel that we have. The second one on basically the Israel-Hamas Gaza situation, pathways in the Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab context moving forward. And the third one on the Hezbollah or Lebanon-Israel track, which is also one that is is moving in very dangerous directions. So again, thanks for coming. Very pleased to be cooperating with SMU. And Ray, please step to this podium and make your opening remarks, sir. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, for that wonderful introduction, and thank all of you for being here this morning. I know it's kind of a challenge to go through a big city like Washington in the mornings and be here by 8 o'clock or 8:30 or 9 to do, I'm saying 8 o'clock because I still think I'm in Dallas, to do a event like this, but we really appreciate you all being here. We've been collaborating or colluding with the Middle East Institute for quite some time now. And Paul did mention I am Ray Rafidi. I'm the Senior Associate Director with the Tower Center. What he didn't tell you is this morning I noticed he had this really cool lapel pin. And I said, I sure would like one of those. And now I've got one, so I'm actually an infiltrator this morning. So keeping with the theme of what we're doing here. But I'd also like to thank the people we've worked with here at MEI, in addition to Paul, his wonderful colleagues, Molly Donahue, Ben Friedman, who I don't see. I know Ben was here. Oh, there you are. He took my old seat. And I don't see Lindsay Bennis, but Lindsay has also helped coordinate this as well, too. So thank you all so much. We want to we've had a wonderful relationship with MEI, and we're really looking forward to doing this today. So without further ado, I will introduce my colleague, Professor Sabri Atesh in the History Department at SMU. He will lead off the first panel, and Sabri, I'll let you start.
All right. Thank you very much, Ray. And I'm very happy to be here and see some good friends here as well. So this is my first ever time coming to Washington for a panel in one of the think tanks. So, so I'm very happy to be here. And we are going to talk about tackling the proxy problem, mitigating the threat posed by Iran's axis of resistance. Now, Iran, I teach history of Iran, and Iran has a very unique ability to be in the news, especially since 1979. I don't think there has been any time that Iran has not been in the news, starting with the Iran-Iraq war, with the pro-democracy demonstrations ongoing, periodically being suppressed in Iran. So Iran is always in the news. And as you know, it's not only in the conflict that is in the news that Iran is involved. Iran is in many theaters, right? In the Caucasus, again, where it's involved in Armenian Azerbaijan issue. As we know, it was almost getting into a escalation with Pakistan. It is a possibility of a clash with Afghanistan, with Taliban, is not very remote. It is involved in Yemen and, of course, the Gulf and Red Sea. So Iran is everywhere, in a way. And the question I wanted to start with is today, the name of our panel is Tackling the Proxy Problem. And I wanted to start with this terminology, with the very term proxy. And I checked Oxford English Dictionary before coming here, of course. And proxy has this kind of loaded word. And one of the things that proxies don't have is the agency and consciousness in a way, right? They are somebody else's horse in the race. And when I look at the press, instead of being agents of their own, they are treated as if they are Iranian lackeys rather than a power of their own. And they are kind of the servile followers of the Ayatollah, right? This mysterious creature that we know who he is, but exists somewhere in Tehran, and they are serving him. So I wanted to start with this and see what you guys kind of think. I'm very sorry, I should have introduced my panelists, right? And
Maybe they're only proxies.
They are my proxies. I asked Paul to do that, and he said you should do it. So let me introduce my proxies. So first, Nadwa al-Dawsari. Nadwa is a Yemeni researcher, and she's a non-resident scholar here. And Alex Batankhah, I will assume, is the director of Iran program here. As I told you, this is my first Washington panel, so I don't know how you guys do things here. So let's start here. I'm very happy to be on the panel with you guys, and I'm looking forward to learning from you too. So what you guys think of in the example of Houthis, and of course, Alex, whichever other groups you want to concentrate on, are they Iranian proxies in the sense that they don't have an agency of their own and they are serving Iranian agenda, or they are their own actors?
I'll talk about the Houthis. I think it's not, I think it's something in the middle. So the Houthis are serving Iran's agenda, but it's also their agenda. And they have their own agenda, which is in line with Iran's agenda in the region. So I think when it comes to proxy, you probably should expand the definition a little bit. The Houthis wouldn't have been here without Iran's support. They couldn't have taken over Yemen without Iran's commitment, long-term commitment. I mean, this is an investment since the 80s that Iran has put into the Houthis, and it's materialized in the most effective way possible. So are they an Iran proxy? Yes and no. Does Iran direct the Houthis? Does it control the Houthis? No. But Iran has empowered the Houthis to a point where the Houthis can act on their own. But they still very strong allies, and they still have long-term plans for the region.
So who has the last word when it comes to the Houthis and their involvement in the conflict?
The Houthis.
The Houthis, not Iran?
No.
Wow. No, if I could just build up on that. And by the way, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. It's great to see so many folks out. We haven't done this for a while because of the pandemic, so it's great to be back. Look, just to build up, it's easy to use the word proxy, and I don't say this to be sympathetic towards the Islamic Republic, but in fact, it's proxies as a method of foreign policy being used. I mean, the United States used it the most in the Cold War, Soviet Union, China, post-Soviet Union, if you could, country of Russian Federation. I mean, from Moldova to Ukraine to the Caucasus. I mean, countries have been using proxies in different ways for a long time. Where the Iranian system or the model of what they call forward defense, part of their doctrine of, or part of the sort of ideology of axis of resistance, where they stand out, I think, for two reasons. One, which is the reason why we talk about the Iranian proxies as much as we do in Washington, they're anti-American in terms of their mission, and they're anti-Israel, right? Mm-hmm. That's the main reason. That's why we talk about it. Lots of regional states have proxies in Syria, elsewhere. We all know who they are. But they're not necessarily anti-American and anti-Israel, and we don't pay attention to it. Number two, the Iranians have committed themselves to this cause and stayed the course.
Yes.
And that means, a lot of other countries over the last 20-some years, I mean, Axis of Resistance was born as a response to the Axis of Evil speech of President Bush in 2002. The Iranians came up with the idea of, okay, we're part of the evil, we're going to resist you. Axis of Resistance was born. And if you look at the last 20 years, and there's the first phase, and then there's the second phase that comes after the Arab Spring erupts. In both cases, the Iranians build up this network. So they spent 20 years building up this network. Love to talk about if the cost-benefit analysis is shifting given recent events. We can get to that perhaps. But my point is they stayed the course. And probably the one biggest of their victories up until now, and that could change, is the way this made Assad in Syria survive. The way the Americans haven't been able to play their cards the way they wanted to play their cards in Iraq. Now, the Iranians don't consider Iraq a straight win, but they don't feel like they've lost in that country either. So their models, though, the non-state actors are essentially part of the success story from Iran's point of view up to today. But again, if we get a chance to talk about where we're going forward, because I think that cost-benefit analysis is actually shifting. And Iran really has to start thinking, we could get away with so much using the proxy model up until now, but now everybody else is waking up to it. They're pushing us, they're bringing the war to us, and is this model worth?
That was one of the questions I wanted to come to, because those, they proxies, if we call them proxies, as Nadwa said, I'm not very comfortable with the word proxy. They provide Iran with a power projection that provides Iran really plausible deniability. Right? Iran can project its power, can carry out acts that it doesn't want to commit itself to. And so they, in that sense, it's very inventive, right? It very versatile tool to have. And as you said, Iran has made a very long-term investment in this, and it's not going to go away. Now, it also gives Iran a strategic depth and cover to have those. So Iran keeps the war away from Iran. But as you said, how long that will continue, how long that could go, because at one point or another, a second kind of consideration has to come into account. And the cost-benefit analysis has to be thought about. Now, what I want to go from there to, I want to go over each of the what we call proxies. And I want to actually start, maybe Alex, with you, with Iraq, because numerically, I think the largest proxy group that Iran has is Hashd al-Shaabi. Mm-hmm. Hezbollah perhaps is the jewel in the crown, but Hashd al-Shaabi numerically, I think, is the largest, right? And so what I want to bring in Iraq, two other actors, in competition with Iran directly among many, United States and Turkey. Mm-hmm. Like Turkey, as you know, Erdogan recently visited Iraq. They signed a lot of new deals that might go into effect or not go into effect. And United States is trying to bring Iraq to Arab Coordination Committee was formed a while back when even Tillerson and McGurk actually brought the Haidar al-Abadi to meet King Salman. So there is this effort to bring Iraq to the Arab fold. And I want you to talk about, is there a possibility of this kind of detangling Iraq from Iran? and how this will shape the Iraqi theater, but also Iranian proxies, if you might call them so, in Iraq. And so I wanted to talk about, is there a way of limiting Iranian influence in Iraq and kind of neutralizing what is the largest proxy force, right? Because the way I see Hashd al-Sha'bi, Hezbollah, we maybe talk about that as well, is kind of a parallel or alternative government that is forming with those proxies. They're not just proxies that you use actually in this operation or that operation, but they are becoming parallel governments in one way or another. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Iraq. What is the situation there, how it goes, and is there a possibility of deterrence?
Before I turn to Iraq, just making a sort of a bigger point in the sense that when you look at the proxies that Iran has in terms of partners in this network, you have to study them individually to understand how Iran has leverage over them. This idea that Washington can tomorrow come up with one policy and they'll deal with all Iranian proxies in the region overnight, obviously that's nonsense, because they operate in very specific locations, conditions that has allowed Iran to come in and become the sort of benefactor of some of these groups. Like you mentioned Hezbollah. Hezbollah is at one end of the spectrum. That's the one entity where you can argue that they're the closest to the Islamic Republic in every way possible, in terms of the geopolitical understanding of the world, in terms of the sectarian connections, all the rest of it. And at the other end, as Nat was said, you got the latest member of the axis of resistance, the Houthis, and we're doing exactly the same thing we've done with the Assad regime now, trying to convince ourselves that the Houthis are Shia. And, if you pick up any American newspaper, before you read Houthi, Iran-backed Houthis. It's like, that's the way you have to understand Houthis. You're missing the point. You don't understand that the Houthis have their own agency, their own agenda. But this is the way Washington goes, and it goes back to the point I made earlier, because we are so focused on Iran, because Iran is the only entity in the region that officially wants to eject the United States from the region. So it gets our attention, and that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's very important to keep that spectrum in mind. But in terms of Iraq specifically, I don't think that battle has been lost. I think the United States still has a chance to, you could say the US lost the war in Iraq, but I don't think it's too late when you think in decades down the road in terms of shaping this country. It's a pretty big country in the Middle East. Where Iraq goes will have an impact. It will also have an impact on Iran. The sort of the 5 or 6 groups that the Iranians have created since 2005-06 in Iraq, there are, as you said, state within a state. Essentially what the Revolutionary Guards have done, those of you who know the Revolutionary Guards, the IRGC in Iran, that's a state within a state. And what they've tried to do, replicate the same model in places like Iraq. Hezbollah is a state within a state in Lebanon, and some of these larger groups in Iraq operate the same way. They are doing some of Iran's bidding, but as we've seen in recent weeks, there is question in terms of, does Iran actually have that sort of control that you expect them to have? We saw that with the rockets that were fired that led to the death of 3 American soldiers in Jordan. Immediately, we heard that Ismail Ghani, the head of Quds Force, went and told the Iraqis, back off because the Americans are serious about retaliation. And there was a few days of speculation whether the Iranians actually had the ability to control the actions of these proxies. And that's a key issue here for us to think about it, is if the Iranians don't have that kind of control, how can you take advantage of that situation? And to your point, how can you peel some of these elements in places like Iraq that have looked to Iran for support and say, actually, that was Iran where Iraq was in a civil war, state of civil war. You needed arms, you needed the sort of support. The Iranians were the only ones willing to provide. But Iraq is looking at a different period going forward, is looking at reconstruction, development. This is where the Gulf countries become so much more relevant. And we see that, by the way, in Syria. The reason Assad's regime in Syria is so quiet about the Iran-Israel conflict, because they can't afford to get themselves involved in that conflict. They're looking at post-war reconstruction phase, who can offer them what. And Iran was a great supporter for them in the fight against the opposition, but going forward, the Iranians don't have much to offer them. Iran is sanctioned, Iran is cash poor, and so forth. So my point, and I'll stop here, is let's take every proxy that we call Iranian proxy and deal with them in terms of the the location where they emerged, the conditions that allow them to emerge. And let's not forget one other fundamental thing. The Islamic Republic has not been able to successfully export its revolution to a single place where the governance was working well. They only come in when there's security vacuum, when there's chaos, and they offer their services. You make sure there is no vacuum, and Iran won't be able to find its way in.
So this will be kind of how we can perhaps limit Iran. I want you to continue with kind of the same question when it comes to Yemen and Houthis. So what you said is Houthis are their own actor.
Yes.
They are in cooperation with Iran. One thing I want to talk about, what is the limits of Iranian involvement in Yemen? As Alex said, okay, Iran supported Houthis. What are the limits of Iranian involvement in Yemen? And is there a way of, again, because this is what our panel also is supposed to be about, detaching them from Iran? What will be the way to kind of peel off the proxies from Iran?
Yeah. I mean, Iran has been involved in Yemen, like I said, for decades, more so since the beginning of the war. So there's been hundreds of IRGC commanders, Hezbollah commanders, helping the Houthis, do military strategizing, information warfare, training, and manufacturing weapons. I mean, Iran has effectively helped the Houthis develop weapon manufacturing, and we've seen that manifest in attacks against Saudi Arabia and also now in the Red Sea. How do we limit Iran's involvement in Yemen? Is by stopping the coming of weapons from Iran to the Houthis. There's no inspection mechanism. Since the beginning of the truce in April 2022, the Saudis dismantled their inspection mechanisms on ships coming into the Red Sea, which is controlled by the Houthis, the Hodeidah seaport. And for at least the past year, the UN mechanism also has been suspended because the Houthis wanted that as a condition to engage in the negotiations. So there's a level of complicity by the regional actors and the UN as well. We need to stop weapons coming from Iran to the Houthis. These weapons come as parts, and then they're assembled inside Yemen. That's why Iran helped the Houthis develop this capacity, this skill to sort of, assemble these weapons, and then they become missiles and drones. So that's the most important way to stop the Houthis. And then, like he said, I agree with Alex. You need to ensure that there is no vacuum in Yemen. Iran entered Sana'a, took the capital, controlled north of Yemen in a vacuum. So we need to support the Yemeni government and the Yemeni government forces to, at least at a minimum, stop the Houthis from expanding militarily within Yemen.
No, I think this is a very important point, and what you and Alex said, that Iran is very good at getting into the situations that it is explosive, and there's a vacuum of power. But Yemen, the Houthis did not start with Gaza war, right? The Houthis started their resistance about 20 or so years ago, and in 2015, Saudis and their allies actually start bombing the Houthis, and they were not able to actually defeat the Houthis. So Iran, in that sense, is not the only actor, the Houthis themselves. But I wanted to also, you guys, to talk about this recent Gaza war and how this changed the dynamics of Iran's kind of projection of power. Is Iran at a limit of its power, or it actually helped Iran to become the superpower of the region, right? I think this is one of the things that is happening, right? The other side of this question are those groups, right, proxy groups, by increasing their dependency on Iran, are they coming to their limits? Is this all they could kind of come to, and we are at a kind of turning point?
Right. I mean, on the issue of Iran becoming the superpower, I would say Iran is capable, maybe will become a super spoiler in the region, but superpower is a whole different matter, because you need to have the sort of qualities that, the Iranian economy, for example, doesn't have anything to offer I mean, Iran right now would wish it could be integrated in some of the regional projects that others like the Saudis and the Gulf states are engaged in. So they have a focus on the use of non-state actors, providing weapons and so forth, training. There's a lot of media support that goes in. You know, the Iranians are, as non-Arabs in a region where Arabs are a majority, the Iranians rely on the likes of Hezbollah to do a lot of the propaganda part of their agenda in Arabic, targeting Arab audiences. But before I turn to Gaza war, because you talked about strategic depth, the one thing that Iran's regional agenda, I think, really will have to wrestle with is the lack of strategic support in Iranian society for what the regime is doing in the region.
Can I stop you there and go actually to that question before you go to the other one? Because this is one of the things that always comes up, right? Iran is seen as a state that is aggressively pursuing to resurrect the Persian Empire, right? Or as King Abdullah said, the Shia Crescent. But Iran seems to be the state that is most involved in Arab-Israeli conflict.
Right.
And I wanted to talk kind of a little about this. What is is conflict with Israel central to Iran's national security strategy?
Right. I would say, to your point, if Iran was about what the Shah used to be about, I mean, the Shah, every embassy or major embassy before 1979 had a branch that was about promoting Persian culture, Persian language,
True.
The concept of Iran Zamin, the sphere of Persian influence. If that was what the Islamic Republic was intent to, building on, they should have been much more focused in places like Central Asia, Afghanistan, Caucasus,
India, Pakistan.
That's where the Persian influence is. What they have done instead is to look at Israel and go south towards the Arab world. And for that, the reason for that is because they're ideologically driven. It's an Islamist agenda, not an Iranian nationalist agenda. And people like to sort of, we all engage in this sort of lazy intellectualism. They want to re-erect the Persian Empire, so on. That's not what Khamenei wants to do. Khamenei's focus is not an Iranian. He's more of a Muslim leader. I mean, I know might create some pushback saying he's an Iranian nationalist, but essentially what he says in his words is he is someone who believes in the Islamic world united with one leadership, one set of goals. And certainly to get to that promised land, you need to have that common enemy. And that common enemy is the West, it's the United States, and is certainly what the Iranian vernacular calls the settler colonial project that they refer to Israel as. So Gaza war, very quickly, I'd love to hear what Nawaz says about this as well. The Iranians from day one, I wrote about this for Foreign Policy 2 weeks after the war started. I said there is no way Iran wants to see a regional war. They can't afford it. They know it. They're going to do what they've always done, commit themselves to the long-term strategic patience, bleed Israel to, through hundreds, thousands of cuts, hope that the Israeli public opinion says, you know what, we can't stay in this region. It's just not welcoming enough. The United States gets tired. Basically, what they want to see is replication of what the U.S. has done from Vietnam in the 70s to Afghanistan, the most recent one. That U.S. simply gets tired. It's 7,000 miles away. These are wars of choice. U.S. can afford to pack up and leave. That's what Khamenei is banking on. It's a huge gamble on his part. I don't think the United States is going to leave the region. And I think, in fact, the United States is going to make it harder for him to continue the path he's been on. So
I think it
that's my speculation.
brought the United States in, right?
It's bringing the United States back in, exactly. I mean, that's the conspiracy theory out there.
And this is one of the things I wanted to actually ask both of you guys, and especially about you, because we have Operation Prosperity Guardian going on, right, with the Houthi attacks and all. And did Gaza kind of allowed Houthis to cement their political authority in Yemen and also provide Iran with further incentive to support them? How did the new war shape the dynamics in Yemen?
Yeah, the Houthis are really, really good at seizing opportunities to escalate. They've done that in Yemen for 10 years. I mean, they've taken the capital city of Sana'a because the government raised $500 on fuel, which was like $2, and they took that as an opportunity to mobilize against the government and take the capital. So I guess that was just another opportunity for the Houthis to move to their next level of escalation, which is now the Red Sea, and engage the US, engage Israel, engage the West directly. What was the question again you said?
But what I'm saying that did it allow the Houthis to cement their authority in Yemen?
Yes. Not in Yemen. So the Houthis have been controlling North Yemen since 2014. That hasn't changed. But what it allowed the Houthis to do is probably becoming the jewel in the crown of the axis of resistance, becoming, the sort of, spearhead of the axis of resistance and sort of project themselves as an international power. I think that's what has allowed the Houthis to do more than cementing their power within Yemen.
All right, Alex, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just, again, I want to go back to my point. When you're sitting in Iran right now, the Iranian public opinion, where it is about all the issues they're dealing with, the idea that Iran now has a regional strategy where it can effectively close Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal and bring the world economy to its knees. This is the sort of thing that some of the craziest of ideologues in the Islamic Republic might still pay attention to and love to hear that sort of rhetoric from their own mouths. But this doesn't really have an audience in Iran. The Iranian public opinion and the survival of the Islamic Republic really depends on this. Can they turn themselves off the region and focus on what's going on? They got a long list of problems at home. They've lost their own people. They've lost their youth. They don't even dare send their conscripts to regional wars. They have to rely on Afghans and Pakistanis to do the fighting. There is no way in this world they can go and get 18-year-old Iranian conscripts go to Yemen. I mean, God bless Yemen, but the average Iranian doesn't really know much about Yemen. I mean, you have to go back to the Sassanid Empire of 600, the year 600, when the Persians were actually physically there. And the relations with the Houthi movement, am I right in thinking Abdul Malik Houthi is still the supreme leader of the Houthis? They don't need Ali Khamenei as a supreme leader. Yeah. They have their own supreme leader. They have their own system set up. So, Iran is paying all this money directly, and we can say, oh my God, the proxy model for the Iranians costs nothing. And that's true compared to what other wars in the region have cost. It doesn't cost them that much. But the indirect cost of what Iran is doing for their economy, because of even if you had a nuclear deal tomorrow between US and Iran will still remain sanctioned because of what it's doing in the region. And again, on top of that, you have public opinion in Iran that's against what they're doing. So I just don't see how this is going to be able to continue to run its course, certainly not after the death of the 85-year-old Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who is the one man who's kept this together for the last 35 years, essentially, because of his ideological commitment to this idea of ejecting the United States out of the Middle East and fighting the Israelis to the end.
No, definitely the Iranian population is not behind it, right? If we just remember, the largest demonstrations perhaps in the history of Islamic Republic just took place before Gaza war, as it happened in Israel, right? Where the whole debate about the constitutional court. So this has been a very interesting break for both of those countries to push their internal crisis down the drain and concentrate on other things. So as our time is slowly ending, I wanted to ask you guys, is the shadow war that was waged through a variety of means now, right, over, and Iran came to the kind of end of its use of proxies. And in relation to that, one of the questions that we had in our official announcement was, what steps can US and its partners take now to ensure additional Iranian-supported forces do not join this conflict? So what about the role of the United States? We can talk about Iran all the way we want. What about the role of US? What should US do? And what is US is doing to kind of prevent them from further inflaming what is already going on?
Look, the simple reality, I'll be very quick, and a simple reality in the US part is there is no American policy on Iran. We become addicted to sanctions. That's all we do. We throw more sanctions at names and entities as if that matters. It doesn't matter. It hasn't changed the game for a very long time. It's just make yourself feel, make Congress feel good that they're doing something. They're not. They're not changing the trajectory. If you look at the period 2002, when Iran's nuclear program was revealed to the world, to I guess the last few years, you went from Iran being very worried of being the next American target after Afghanistan and Iraq, genuinely ready to make compromises, genuinely willing to change course in terms of their policies, to Iran today that doesn't take the United States seriously. We can deal with the United States case by case. And I think the last few weeks might maybe proved that point, that even when they did what they did, firing literally something that we've never seen before, hundreds of missiles and drones at Israel, they figured we can still manage this. How do you shape that calculation on the Iranian part? How do you make them worried about the way they were worried in 2002, right after 9/11, that the United States is going to go crazy and do something? Whether the US will do that or not is an entirely separate conversation. But my point is, you got to get the Iranians to take the US seriously. And I'm not sure if that's where we are right now. But I say one other thing about the United States, the role it has played in recent weeks in containing the crisis between Israel and Iran has been quite amazing from my perspective. I mean, it's to do that when you have one very close ally, Israel, and your main adversary in the region, and yet you are able to manage the crisis. That to me shows that the United States still has a lot that it can do in the region if it puts its mind to it.
And will you see that there's a kind of tacit agreement between Iran and the United States not to turn this into a regional conflict?
Absolutely. I mean, for different reasons, and I think it's true for the Israelis too. The United States can see being sucked into another major war in the Middle East, and a war with Iran would be far bigger than Afghanistan, Iraq. It's just a big beneficiary of the likes of China and Russia. It will be a generational conflict. It will set the United States back in so many ways for so long. So of course, it's not in the interest of the United States to do what it did in Iraq, say 2003. The Iranians, they would lose the Islamic Republic. I mean, that's a pretty straightforward. I think it would be maybe not just the end of the Islamic Republic, maybe the end of Iran as this unitary state we know, because it is an imperial state and there are separatist tendencies in parts of the country. So the future of Iran as a country could be at risk. But I also say one thing about the Israelis. I don't think the Israelis want a regional war either. And I think that was been in the news a lot lately, saying the way they sort of attacked the embassy of Iran in Damascus was designed to provoke a big reaction from the Iranians to start a regional war. I don't read it that way. I think the Israelis probably, and I read that a lot of them are wondering if it was the right thing they did. But what they wanted to do is to make Iran, force Iran to think, you can't sit back and hit us through proxies anymore. We're going to take the war to you. And that could be a game changer in terms of going forward.
Yes.
I mean, the United States doesn't even have a policy on Yemen or the Middle East, for that matter. I think for the past 1 year, it's been pretty much reacting to events unfolding in the region. We've seen that in the war on terror, and since the beginning of the Arab Spring 2011 and the beginning of the war in Yemen 2014, the U.S. has been too focused on quick fixes. So the Iran deal, things like that. But so yes, I agree. So really interesting what you said, and I agree. So Iran has invested in all these proxies. And now these proxies are creatures on their own. The Houthis can carry on even if the Islamic Republic ended tomorrow, the Houthis can carry on. And the interesting thing, an important thing to keep in mind is that the Houthis are a young force. They're extremely energetic, they're capable, they're reckless because they're driven by ideology more than anything. And everything that's happened over the past 10 years reinforced their belief that they are in a divine mission, and they're thinking long term. It doesn't matter what the sacrifices are. I mean, even if like half Yemenis died, this is all for the greater cause, which is the Islamic government, which is global. So I think the U.S. needs to have a strategy. And it has to be long term. It cannot be election cycle to election cycle anymore, because the West is not too far. And if the region falls into chaos, and it could, Iran cannot control these proxies, the West will be impacted. And it's not just the global shipping and economy, it's also security-wise. What the US should do in the case of Yemen is two things. Again, one, there needs to be more aggressive measures to stop Iranian weapons coming to the Houthis. And two, the US need to ensure that the state in Yemen does not fall apart. And they need to make sure that the Yemen government forces are supported enough to stop the Houthis from expanding. Because if the Houthis expand, and that's been their plan, they've been mobilizing, and take Yemen, then what are we going to do if they start, is the US going to invade Yemen? We don't want that.
Are we going to two Yemens again then?
It's not going to work, huh?
Are we going to have two Yemens again then?
We don't know how that will unfold on the ground, but what I'm saying is that we need to ensure that the Yemeni government is stronger and has the necessary military force to stop the Houthis from expanding beyond where they are at right now.
One question there, because we talked about the Iranian ideological fixation, right? That they are involved in this for ideological reason rather than other geopolitical reasons and economic reasons and what have you. Is there an ideological fixation on Iran that makes the solution of the problems for United States more difficult?
It's hard for the United States not to be fixated on a country that is, ideologically committed to ejecting the United States from a region. So that just right away, that posture grabs your attention. Now, Ali Khamenei last week said, the supreme leader of Iran last week said that in the context of the nuclear talks, what is it you want, the United States? What is it you want? Give me the bottom line, because we've cut deals with you before, such as the JCPOA of 2015, and you walked away, meaning the Trump administration did. Anyway, the point I'm trying to get to is if he starts articulating that kind of the reality that he's willing to sit down and talk to the United States. Because right now, as of today, there are no direct talks between the two sides. He can go down the path of looking for a solution, but I think as the lesser power, they might think in the Islamic Republic they're the same size as the US, they're not. So they need to sort of maybe bite the bullet and say, look, what can we do to talk about the things that we can, perhaps make compromises on both sides. The nuclear issue, they've already proven they can do that. They can do that again, maybe not in the US election year, something they can do. But it's very important to talk about the region. Any Iranian-American deal on the nuclear front that doesn't talk about what Iran is doing in the region and its overall position on the United States, not going to be lasting one. Final point is this, and we're here in Washington. I cannot see for the life of me Iran being able to have normal relations with the United States until it really makes some serious reconsideration in terms of its position in the state of Israel.
Okay.
They can go back to what they offered back in the 2003 so-called grand bargain, deal with Israel, perhaps, like Turkey does or other countries. You have problems with Israel, the issue with the Palestinians, but you certainly take a different approach in terms of providing missiles to the like of Hezbollah and being committed to the destruction of the Jewish state. So that is one of the I just cannot see how U.S.-Iran relations can go to the normal unless the Iranians make some changes on their position in Israel.
So it all comes down to a solution to Palestinian problem will bring solution to this. But I want to go to, in the 3 last minutes that we have, one of the points that Nadwa kind of brought up, the religious aspect of those proxy forces, right? Iran has an religio-ideological, we might say, commitment. But you talked about the religious dimension of the Houthis, and I want you to kind of bring in other proxy forces and how much they share this ideological and religious fixation about the end times, about messianic expectations and this and that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the axis of resistance, I can speak to the Houthis more than any other resistance members, but I think the rest of the resistance groups, also axis of resistance groups, have the same ideology, which is, bringing Armageddon. And here's where there's an ideological difference between the Houthis and all these other Iran axis of resistance groups, because the Houthis are not Shia. Okay, now Shia believe that there are 12 imams. And in the end of times, the 12th imam who died, he went into a cave. He went into a cave in the 9th century, and he will emerge, and he will lead the Muslim world, and he will receive allegiances in Mecca, and then he will march with his army to Jerusalem, kill the Jews, and establish, Islamic governments, and prepare for Jesus to come back. Okay, and then kill the Antichrist. Now, for the Houthis, they're not 12 imams. The Houthi founder ridiculed this theory. The Houthis believe that the imam will be born of Prophet Muhammad's descendants, which is probably now, I don't know, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, I don't know. And he will march from Yemen, take Mecca, receive allegiances from supporters, march with the army to Jerusalem, liberate Jerusalem, and lead the Muslim Ummah, prepare for Jesus to come back, and then lead the Muslim Ummah, and then establish an Islamic government that's based in Jerusalem, and that expands into Constantinople, which is Istanbul, and then Rome. Rome, scholars say it could be Europe. And all Muslims believe in this. All Muslim scholars believe in this theory that at the end of the day, this Mahdi figure will emerge.
But in Sunni Islam, it's not as strong as it's in Shia Islam.
It is it is
Shia
strong in
Islam.
Sunni Islam. It is, yes. The Mahdi theory, yes.
It's not as
a
strong as it's in
prophecy.
Shia Islam. That much I can assure
No,
you.
it is. Yes, Muslim scholars, doesn't matter which spectrum they are, they all believe in this Mahdi emergence and end of days. It's Mahdi, and it's, wait for Jesus to come back, control Jerusalem, expand, Islamic state, global Islamic state. And so the only difference is that, there is 12 imams versus, the imam will be born of, this today. And so I think one thing I want to end with is that for the US, please don't just focus on Iran to solve problems in the Middle East. Iran's proxies are creatures on their own. And two, please also acknowledge that there is an ideology that drives all these actors.
All right. I think that's a good place to end, because we are more kind of focused on military capacity and this and that, but there's the ideological and religio-ideological dimension that we actually tend to forget. So I'm very glad you brought that, and we will end here and open the floor for the questions of the audience. Yes, sir.
This whole question about proxies maybe being a good word, bad word, to the extent that the network that exists that's aligned with Iran is or isn't controlled by Iran, so let's say it's on 1 to 100% spectrum, is it somehow maybe more of a threat if they aren't being in some ways controlled and potentially restrained by Iran? Because one could think one way to take on this network would be to weaken the integrity of it. But would that in fact be maybe counterproductive and make the threat bigger? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Look, I think it depends on, again, circumstances, the group that you're talking about. So if you're talking about a proxy group that decides, to say in Iraq or Syria, to go rogue, they are going to attack Israel regardless. And they got 5 Shahed 136 drones. They fire them off, and Iran says, I'm not going to give you any more because you're putting me at risk, because we just got a call from Americans saying any more drones coming to Israel's way, we'll take you, Iran, responsible, right? So, but then you got the Houthis, whole different set of arsenal, air to sea missiles that actually is taking, as we all know, shipping hostage. So I think take them individually by case by case. That's the best approach I would have thought. I mentioned this in my remarks before. There must be a fear in Iran that, sponsorship of groups that are doing bad things in the region might come Iran's way as being held responsible, and Iran will pay the consequences. We haven't seen that yet, but imagine a scenario where the United States says, forget about supply of missile parts to the Houthis. We will take an IRGC base in this part of Iran as responsible for coordinating with the Houthis, and we'll take it out. Again, that would represent a major escalation on the part of the United States, something they have been unwilling to do. But that's the kind of thing that, again, IRGC will have to take very seriously, because the whole concept of proxy warfare rests on this basic notion: you fight your enemies outside of Iran's borders on the cheap. It comes to you, well, suddenly the proxy model has to be rethought entirely.
Other questions, Jim?
Professor Atesh.
Yes, sir.
Does Turkey have any role at all to play in this?
I mean, this is one of the questions I brought up with bringing Iraq into kind of the Arab fold. And Turkey is, I think, also pushing for that because of its own problems with the Kurds and with its fight with PKK and all, which Turkey is planning to have a big operation this summer. So detaching Iraq from Iran is actually part of Turkey's agenda, which actually works for the US as well. And that makes sense as a NATO member. So Turkey has its own proxies in Iraq. The KDP is, in a way, the Kurdish Democratic Party is actually part of Turkish Grand Plan. And in Syria, Turkey has its own proxies, and their headquarters are in Syria. So Turkey is involved in that, and Erdogan is saying that they will actually going to cut their relations with Israel. So maybe not proxy, but they have their proxies in the war, if not actively involved at the minute.
So Turkey doesn't have a big conflict with Iran.
Turkey does have a conflict with Iran, especially in the Caucasus and in Iraq, right? So what happened in Azerbaijan, Turkey and Israel, and in Armenia, Turkey and Israel helped Azerbaijan, and Iran is somehow an ally with Armenia. And Azeris want to open a corridor that will connect Nakhchivan to Azerbaijan, and Iran is dead set against it. And then there is the problem of Azeri nationalism that Turkey can use. So Turkey and Iran actually are in another war, Cold War of sorts between each other, between themselves. It's hushed, but in Syria they are in different camps, right? Iran is supporting Assad. Turkey is supporting the many factions that are headquartered in Turkey. So there is another shadow war that's actually going on between Iran and Turkey.
Can I just quickly build on
Sure.
that? As somebody who hails from the Middle East, but grew up actually in Europe before coming here to US 20 years ago, I remember living through European integration, benefiting all the peoples of Europe. And I remember growing up, there were still people who had gone through the Second World War. I tell you, but the consequences of not working with your neighbor would be. Middle East still has to wake up to that reality. Unfortunately, when we're talking about proxy war is a result of a mentality of zero-sum game. Turkey and Iran, two countries, about just under 200 million market, they could do wonderful things together if they were thinking big, lifting both of them up. But what do? They get involved in, I'm going to undercut you here, you undercut me here, I use the Kurds at this branch of whatever, you do that to me. I mean, it's not just Iran and Turkey, it's across the region. And this is the sad reality of a region full of resources, human, natural. I mean, they're literally in the Gulf states sitting on trillions of dollars in funds that they could use to invest. They're investing everywhere else in the world except their own home region. So it needs leadership to start. There's a lot of talk about the Ummah, the Muslim. And so, look, in reality, none of it matters. They're engaged in zero-sum petty competition. And that's not to be too negative about it, but I mean, that's just the way I think.
All right. So we have a question from you.
Yes, I'm David Mack, a very old MEIN. And my particular question is for Alex Vatanka. And that is, some late-breaking news that came to me is that Muqtada Sadr may return to Iraqi politics. I'd like you to say what the implications of that would be, including implications for Iran's proxy strategy.
Thank you, Ambassador Mack. Great to see you. I wish I could tell you anything useful because I didn't even know that. So I can't really say anything specific to that issue. But overall, just in the general sense, Iraq always has the potential to be an alternative, Shia majority Iraq, to be an alternative to the Islamic Republic. What is politicians like Muqtada Sadr is the Grand Ayatollah, Ali Sistani. They've never done that. For whatever reason, they haven't challenged the model of the Vilayat al-Faqih, the supreme jurisprudence in Iraq. They've never dared to or didn't want to, whatever it is. But if Iraq actually started acting more independently, particularly as a Shia majority Muslim country, and show to its own people, to the Iranians next door, things can be done differently, that again is going to be another major burden for the Islamic Republic's approach to foreign affairs, regional affairs.
Do you have other questions? Sir.
No discussion much today of Saudi Arabia and its relationship to the Houthis, its relationship to Iran, and therefore its relationship to the issue of regional escalation, even though the Biden administration has certainly been talking with them over the course of it. Any thoughts would be welcome.
Yeah, I think Saudi Arabia is too fixated on its Vision 2030. They want to get to 2030, so they want to disengage from any conflict in the region. That's why they're going into they went to Sana'a, and they have the roadmap now, which is an agreement between them and the Houthis, which is not going to end Yemen war. It's going to keep the Houthis a threat to Yemen and also the region. But the Saudis just wanted to disengage with Yemen so that they can focus on their 2030 Vision 2030. I think that's why they also made the agreement with Iran. They just want peace, this sort of temporary peace, so that they can focus on their own domestic issues. And I think it's short-sighted. I can speak to Yemen. This roadmap that the Saudis are proposing, it's going to undermine their ally, which is the Yemeni government, all the forces under the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council, and benefit the Houthis. But the Saudis going into it anyways because they just want out of Yemen.
All right. If we have one short question, we will answer. If not, we will thank our panelists and thank all of you guys for being here. And
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you.